Hey everyone, today we're going to learn the Queen's Gambit declined for the black pieces. So this opening starts after white plays the move d4, we will respond with d5, and now in order for us to play into this opening, white needs to play the Queen's Gambit, which is the move c4. So the Queen's Gambit accepted is taking this gambited pawn, this free pawn that white is giving us, in exchange for some positional things. For example, being able to control the whole center and get some quick development of their pieces. Declining this gambit is a little bit more of a solid way to play, and the way that we do that is with the move e6. The Queen's Gambit declined for both sides is generally considered a pretty classic, solid opening, just because both sides are essentially just following opening principles. You want to be controlling the center, fighting for that control with pawns, bringing more pieces out, developing as quickly as possible, and getting your king to safety. And once you understand the pawn structures and the piece placement that you'll get out of this opening, it will make it a lot easier for you to learn other similar openings that sort of stem from these general ideas. So both players here want to continue with development. White usually brings their knight out. We can put our knight on f6. And now typically the plan is to bring the bishop out, pinning our knight to our queen. And here you can play moves immediately blunting this attack with bringing the bishop to e7. Or you can sort of tempt white into falling for a trap by bringing the knight out here. This is also just like a fine move as far as you want to develop your knight here anyway. But it may look like black has just blundered a pawn because after takes, white can take here, and now the knight can't take back because, the queen is hanging. But it's not that simple, because if we take back, sacrificing our queen, now we bring the bishop out for check on b4. Where's this king supposed to run? White has to sacrifice the queen, and now after all the exchanges are done, we're just simply up a piece. So the Queen's Gambit declined is typically not known as a very trappy, tricky opening, but there are a few that I'll show you, and this is the first one. But going back, white obviously doesn't need to take that pawn and go down this line where they're going to lose material. Of course, this pawn exchange can happen at any moment. It doesn't really change anything. In fact, usually I welcome this pawn exchange as black, because in the Queen's Gambit declined, as in a lot of these more closed pawn structures, the light squared bishop is going to usually be our worst placed piece. It's usually going to sit here on the back rank undeveloped for quite a while unless we make a pretty good effort to get it out. So if white ever makes this exchange, suddenly this opens up a whole new world for this light squared bishop. So usually pretty happy to see this. But the typical plan is to continue with development. Again, we have the option of bringing the bishop out, or we continue with building the pawn structure in the center. White can play like this. We can bring the bishop out now. The light squared bishop can come out here, and now you have the option to take here. This is definitely a line. It essentially makes the bishop move twice, right? So the light squared bishop has moved out once onto d3, and now by taking this pawn, it's forcing our opponent to sort of lose a tempo and take again, putting the bishop on a slightly less optimal square. Evaluation is basically equal here. You really can't go wrong in these kind of positions as long as you know the basics of what you're doing, developing your pieces. But even if we leave this pawn here, we can just castle, white can castle, and we are very happy here. Our next plan is to play the move h6, forcing the bishop to make a decision. Do they want to take and give up the bishop pair and allow us to move our knight out and sort of get our bishops a little bit more into the game? Or do they want to move back, move off of this diagonal, maybe slide back here eventually? Their typical plans in this position usually want to move this rook into the e file. This rook can go on either the d file or the c file, just whichever seems more applicable in your game. Rerouting this knight this way is sometimes a good idea. You can also move this knight up here, kind of force the dark squared bishops off the board. There's a lot of typical plans here. And then this light squared bishop, you're usually told to, in the middle game, look for your piece that is the worst placed piece. And so usually the good thing about the Queen's Gambit declined is you're most often going to know what your worst placed piece is. It's going to be this bishop on c8. So if you can get this bishop out somehow, either pushing the e pawn or the c pawn, just opening up the light squares, that is another typical middle game plan. Another way you can do this is with a move like b6, tucking the bishop into the little pocket here. You can also do this a little bit earlier in the game, having the fianchetto go a little bit sooner. The queen is most often going to find a home on one of these two squares. And then backing up just one move, if this bishop ever takes the knight, we can recapture with the knight. This is good because we eventually want to jump our knight onto e4, provided that it's, well protected and everything, and it's not just going to be losing us material. But this knight on f6 does a nice job of just controlling some key center squares, and we'd rather have it there than back on the 7th rank. This trade is also usually a little bit suboptimal for white because it is allowing black to have the bishop pair, And so now our plan is very straightforward. We want to open up the position. When you have two bishops, you want as many open lines for them to play with as possible. And white with the two knights would usually rather keep the position closed, or at least a little bit more solid of a pawn structure, where their knights can just jump around and our bishops are sort of blocked by our own pawns. And then going back, I'd like to show you another trick that I really like in the Queen's Gambit Declined. It's a variation called the Cambridge Springs, and this variation starts in this position where we have reinforced our pawn center. White is preparing to move the bishop out and get castled, and instead of moving our bishop out and doing the same thing, getting castled, we're actually going to set up some tactics by bringing the queen out to a5. And this does a couple of things. It's pinning the knight to the queen. It's also looking over here at this bishop, and in some cases, it's going to be pretty easy for white to not see that we're actually threatening material. So a very typical variation that I've actually gotten in over the board games is white will bring the bishop out here. This is where we're going to take this pawn, like I said earlier, forcing the bishop to move again. And it's also moving off, defending this diagonal, so we can now move our knight to e4. But actually one of the most common defending moves is queen to c2. So it's also seeming to attack the knight. But remember, this is where the trap comes in. Knights move backwards too. So we can capture the bishop, white captures, and now the queen slides in from the other side of the board and wins a piece right in the first few moves of the game. So that's just one more trap that can result from these Queen's Gambit Declined positions. Queen's Gambit Declined, it will teach you good opening principles, and I hope you'll get some great games in this opening. Thanks so much for watching. If you like this video, please be sure to subscribe. It helps me out a lot. I'll see you soon.